Warmly welcome and good morning. My name is Lisa Pelling. I am very happy to welcome you to the launch of a comparative study on the relationship between climate concern, personal responsibilities, and climate policies in the three countries of Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. The study is called Climate Policies, Attitudes and Behaviors, and it shows that combining redistributive measures with ambitious climate policies strengthen public support across diverse social groups, thereby promoting the success of climate action. This is knowledge and insights I think that we all desperately need. This seminar will take the shape of two presentations. We will first have Asbjørn Sonne Nørgaard, who is one of the co-authors of the study, professor of sociology, former head of the think tank CEVEA in Denmark. Then we'll be joined by Claudia Detsch, who is director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Just Climate Competence Center based in Brussels, who has been the project leader of a major study covering 19 countries looking into the similar issues. We'll also be joined by Jytte Guteland, who's a member of the Swedish Parliament, former member of the European Parliament, and one of Sweden's leading expert in exactly this. How can we turn climate concern into climate action and support for progressive climate policies? But before we start, I'd like to give the floor just shortly to Christina Birke Daniels, who heads the Nordic office of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and who is hosting this event together with us at Arena Idé. Warmly welcome, Christina. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and welcome to our audience on behalf of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Nordic countries, all of our participants. Thank you for taking the time today, or if you are watching this recording later on. I would like to especially also thank you, our brilliant input givers, and you, Lisa Pelling, as the director of think tank Arena, Asbjørn, Sonne Nørgaard for the former CEVEA's work. I think that this is a really important joint venture that we are engaging in today. And I think that all of you, with your competence, have enlightened this debate quite a bit. I must personally say that you often broke with many preconceptions I held from my media reading or from talking to people, where it seemed that people, after all, might be quite critical or might be quite uninterested. And I think that listening to your analysis can inspire us all to get more wind into the progressive discussions and to get us all encouraged again. It seems to be so important to join forces and to strengthen our beliefs these days. I don't want to take too much time, but as you have already mentioned, it is all about turning climate action into policies. And I do think that this combination of work, especially also within the framework of our Just Climate Competence Center with my colleague Claudia Detsch, can really give inputs on different levels. It will be for the media as much as for the policymakers, for analysts, for civil society, and for people who are generally interested. So I'm really glad that we could join forces. Let's keep joining forces and looking at this issue with a bit more differentiation, but giving us drive.
Thank you so much, Christina. Just a reminder to everyone, this is the launch of a major report. You can find the report at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Nordic countries page. You would also find it at Arena Idé, where we are publishing the report also together with a summary report, both of them in English. And as you've already noticed, this is a seminar in English. If you have any questions in Scandinavian, do not hesitate to ask them in your beloved language, and we'll try to help you. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to you, Asbjørn, as a co-author of the report. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I think you're right, Christina. This is a really important collaborative work, and having comparative insight on these issues is really important. I will highlight a few of the main results of the report. And then I would actually also point to another report, which is in the process of being published, which is also a collaborative work on exactly the same countries. So there will be some additional insight on climate attitudes. But without further ado, I will share my screen. And does this work? You have it? Good. Oops, let's see. This was the wrong one, I guess. So now you have the full screen of the slideshow.
Yes, we can see it, Asbjørn. Go ahead.
Good. Okay. As Lisa said, and Christina, this is a small study on climate attitudes and behaviors. It's a 3-country study, and it actually is we have taken out the 3 countries, Denmark, Germany, and Sweden, from a big data set of 19 countries. The data was collected for this study by the CEVEA Institute in 2023. So it's already a couple of years ago, almost. It's also fairly small samples, but that's why we don't dig into a very lot of details, because our sample size does simply not allow it. But it is still some important insights. And what we focus on, as Lisa said, is, well, we know that there is a lot of climate concern out there. But is the climate concern followed by or accompanied by an inclination to act on it personally, to take responsibility for the climate in your own private behavior first? And second, does the climate concern translate into support for, what should we call it, stern, ambitious climate policies? Well, in principle, you should say, of course it should. But in reality, it is not that simple, because you can have a climate concern and still be reluctant to push for ambitious policy measures. Why? Because there's so much else going on there, and you may have other concerns. But fortunately, there is an association between concern and the inclination to support ambitious climate policies. The background, of course, you all know. It is not something theoretical, and it is not something that is only come into focus when the UN climate panel published its report. It's very real. This is Valencia last year, and this is Germany with the flooding, and it's not only in Europe. We see it all over the world. And of course, we all know the background, that with the increasing temperatures far beyond and in a much higher pace than we hope for in the Paris Agreement, these extreme weather situations will continue. So it's not only theoretical, it's not only on the distance, it's very real. And the background, of course, is the increasing global temperatures. So, are we concerned? Yes, we are. The study poses a question. It poses a lot of questions, but one of the core questions is is that we ask whether people are afraid of the consequences of climate change. And 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 3 are actually concerned. The concern is somewhat higher in Sweden than in Denmark, and in particular Germany. But in all 3 countries, large majorities are really afraid of the consequences of climate change. There's another question also in the report, sort of traditional question asking about what are the most important issues that politicians in our country should take care of. And the climate issue is on top of that list, but not at the very top. So in Sweden, 33% of Swedish voters in 2023 said that the climate issue was one of the most important issues that politicians should address. But I also have to say it ranked 5th of the most important issues, and not surprisingly, welfare issues, crime, and immigration ranked higher. In Denmark, almost half said that the climate issue was the most important issue, and it ranked second only to welfare issues about healthcare. So it was very high on the Danish agenda. And in Germany, the climate issue in 2023 in the spring ranked 4th of the most important issues that politicians should address. And not surprisingly, what came in before was energy prices, inflation, and the cost of living. At that time, immigration issues was not a top 3 issue. It was ranking 5th or 6th. So also just to say that there is a lot of dynamic in what is on people's mind. I don't know what would be the result if we were asking today in this very heated political situation. But inflation and cost of living was ranking higher, but even in that context, climate was ranking very high also in Germany. So what we're asking is, okay, we are concerned, a large majority of Danes, Swedes, and Germans are concerned about the climate, and it is ranking pretty high on our agenda. But does this climate concern translate into personal responsibility, willingness to take the personal consequences of your concern and adapt to more climate-friendly behavior? That's the one thing, that's the individual level. And the other one is the extent to which climate concern translate into a preference for ambitious climate policies. We've measured these 3 concepts: personal responsibility, climate concern, and climate policy preferences by batteries of questions. So we combine them into indexes. That's what you usually do to get more robust measures. And all of our measures are very robust. I'll just add to the climate policy preference measure that we have deliberately focused on the willingness to bear costs. For instance, putting an extra tax or fee on airline trips. For instance, putting extra taxes on carbon dioxide emissions and so on. So this is ambitious policies, and we focus on that because the support for the more vague climate policies like, yeah, we should do something about the climate, was extremely high, and it didn't differentiate. So when we are asked as voters in the general, we tend to agree, all of us. But when it comes to the more costly, the more ambitious climate policies, there's more differentiation. So just to say that you can get some other data from the report and some other impressions, but we are focusing on ambitious policies where you put on stern measures to improve the climate. So in general, climate awareness climate concern, personal responsibility, and climate policy ambitions increases with education. This is not new. We know that the educational divide, if you will, or the educational differentiation in attitude is important in all our countries. So we tend to get more aware of the climate. The higher we are educated, we also tend to agree that we have to take more personal responsibility, and we also tend to agree more with the ambition to pursue ambitious climate policies. The education effect is not as big as you could expect, but it is of course there. But our focus here is on the climate concern. And yes, we are concerned, and we are to some extent willing to take action. So climate concern is strongly associated with the willingness to take on more personal responsibility and to adapt your own consumer behavior to the climate challenge. So there's a correlation of 0.72, which is pretty big, and that means that they are very closely related. So the more concerned you are, the more you're willing to take on a personal responsibility. There's also a correlation, pretty strong correlation between climate concern and costly climate policies. However, that is somewhat weaker. So it seems that if ambitious climate policies impose cost on you, well, the most climate concerned are of course more willing to take on these costs, but it is not as the association is not as strong as what could you say, less costly behaviors. So when it comes to airline tickets, yes, the climate concerned are more inclined to accept higher airline prices due to taxation, but the correlation is not that strong. So they are not as willing as to take on personal responsibility, for instance, changing their consumer behavior in other ways. We are concerned, and then of course the question is whether there is a divide or a conflict in the climate issue. We on the center left are very much aware that the climate transition has to be fair, and that if we're going to use economic incentives, then people with low incomes will be hit more relatively on their standard of living than better off people. So one of the most important issues in asking about climate change is whether there's support for a fair green transition. And what we did was simply asking whether people with low income should receive compensation for if the costs of living is increasing. And fortunately, our study shows that there is broad support. More than 3 out of 4 in the study shows that more than 3 out of 4 respondents actually support compensating the poor for costly climate measures. And that is very inspiring, because it's hard to envision a successful green transition without having these redistributive measures being part of it. So in that sense, the findings are very promising. I must say that there is some conflict also, because people of high income are less in favor of compensating the poor than low income individuals. But still, there is, even among high-income earners, there's still a majority in favor of compensating low incomes for the cost of climate policy and increasing prices. So, in the other study I was briefly referring to, we are focusing even more explicitly on the willingness to shoulder the cost of the green transition. So we have actually asked who foots the bill, how willing are we to pay for a green transition? Again, and as I said, it has not been published yet, but it will appear soon. Again, we're focusing on Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, a little bit more respondents, and data collected 1 year later. So that means these data are collected less than a year ago, so it was in the spring of 24. It's around a year after the CENOS data. So maybe there is also an indication of how volatile or shifting the public opinion is. Okay, in this study we have asked, by way of a survey experiment, we've simply put in how much people are sort of willing to pay in terms of increased taxes to improve the climate. We are fully aware that not all climate initiatives are costly and implies increasing taxes, but some do. Investing in green policies, in particular in Germany, where there's sort of a budget squeeze, the question can easily become a question about do we have enough funding? What are the taxes? So that's the one reason some ambitious policies do require revenue. The other reason for opposing this is to sort of measure how strongly you feel for the climate. How much are you willing to sacrifice to pursue a ambitious climate policy? So we have put in three prices or three tax increases and translated into Danish and Swedish kroner. And in Germany, we just use the euro. So a small cost, a medium cost, and a very high cost in terms of increased taxes. The thing is, we've simply divided the sample in three equal sizes, and then a third of the sample have gotten the one condition with the 15 euro tax increase. A third of the samples have received the 50 euro increase, and a third have received the large increase of 150 euro. So this is a way to be sure that we are actually measuring the difference in willingness to pay. So what do we find? Not surprisingly, we find that if it's a small cost, more are willing to pay a small increase to improve the climate than if the increase is higher. So excluding the neither agree nor disagree or undecided, there's a majority who are actually willing to pay a small increase of 15 euro in taxes. And there's also a majority who are willing to pay 50 euros more in taxes, or there's more that agree with this than who disagrees with this statement. However, what we see is if the tax increase is large, the willingness to pay more taxes to improve the climate reduces. And we find the same pattern across all three countries. Around half of respondents are willing to pay a small increase of 15 euro to improve the climate, to undertake ambitious climate measures. Between 35 and almost 50% are willing to take on a medium-sized tax increase, 50 euro a month, and less than a fourth are willing to pay 150 euros more in taxes per month. We also see that perhaps Sweden and Germany, for the medium-size increase of 50 euro, is a little bit less than in Denmark. And I think that is due to the different economic circumstances. Denmark is witnessing a total boom and unemployment rates of nothing, of less than 3%, and high growth rates. So maybe the difference in willingness to pay for the medium size is due to differences in economic conditions. What is also interesting, this is in this study we have been able to ask also about what people are voting for. And what you find, of course, is that the willingness to pay for the green transition is much higher, I mean, like much higher on the left, on the center left, than it is on the right. So this is also an issue that sort of divides voters on the traditional left-right axis. But still, when you go into liberal parties and the CDU, CSU, there's a substantial share who are willing to pay at least some tax increase for ambitious climate policies. And of course, you also find the educational association that we find. The more educated, more highly educated, the more willing you are to pay for ambitious climate policies. I think this is somewhat interesting because even this is seeing the willingness to pay for green transition across income, and actually the rich are willing to pay more in tax, more willing to pay more taxes than the poor, but the difference is not that high. More than 50% of the low-income people in our study are actually willing to bear the cost of a 15 euro increase. So that's really good, but somewhat surprising perhaps also. But the willingness does not increase much when you get richer. Okay, then the last one is support for compensating the poor, which we already have seen in the senior study, but we can do a little bit more in this second study. And the question is basically the same, not quite literally, but the content of the question is the same. People with low income should receive financial grants when sort of, oops. When prices rise due to CO2 taxes. So the content of the question is the same, but it's phrased somewhat differently. And again, we have a majority of who agrees on the compensation, but there are some country differences. And in Germany, perhaps again, due to a bit more economic hardship in Germany, more than 2/3 of the population of voters agree that low-income people should be compensated for climate-related costs, and that share is much smaller in Denmark and Sweden. And as you see, the support is less than in the senior study a year earlier. Maybe it's due to the phrasing of the question, but I think it's more due to real-world changes. But we can perhaps discuss that after my presentation. But we find less support for compensation in the senior study, where you may recall that a full 3/4 of the respondents were willing to compensate low income. But we still find the same for Germany, but in Denmark and Sweden, there seems to be a little less support for that policy, at least in our most recent data. And I think we also I think this is also important that, of course, the poorer you are, the more inclined you are to say that compensation is needed. But look at the richest quintile, those who are earning the highest income. There's actually not that broad a support for compensating low income, and as many disagree. The share of those who disagree is of the same size as those who agree. So it's around a third of voters, high-income voters, who are not inclined to compensate the poor. So, end of this small presentation. Climate concern is widespread, and climate concern is associated with taking more responsibility and also support for more stern climate policies, but less so than the personal responsibility. So when it's costly, the climate concern is less strongly associated with taking stern measures. We have broad support for compensating the poor. In 2023, it seemed to be a bit broader than it is in 2024. And unfortunately, the support for compensating the poor for the green transition is not as widespread among high income individuals. So there might be a genuine divide or conflict here. Around 50% of voters are willing to bear some personal cost for ambitious climate policies. And as you saw, that was the sort of the two lowest increases in taxes, the 15 or 50 euro increase. And we find strong support for willingness to bear the cost, especially among center-left voters, and much less so among voters on the right. But in all cases, when we put on the high cost condition with 150 euro, the support declines rather rapidly. So the cost must not be too high. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Asbjørn. This is extremely interesting data and adds knowledge and insights, but also, of course, as always, complexity to these issues. We will get back to you when you join the panel discussion we'll have in a moment. But first, I'd like to give the floor to Claudia Detsch, who is head of the FES Just Climate Competence Center. Claudia, you have had a major research project into 19 different countries. Please tell us a little bit more about your project and the results.
Yeah, good morning, first of all, and thanks for having me. Thanks to Lisa and hat sie gebeten, yeah. I'm glad now for Lisa and also, of course, for Asbjørn for this very interesting presentation, and thanks for giving us the possibility to outline a bit the results of our survey. Yeah, I'm Claudia Detsch. I'm head of the Competence Center for Climate and Social Justice of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. We are based in Brussels. And maybe just for a brief context here, our competence centers reflect on the core working lines in our international work as Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. So we have 4 of them. It's democracy of the future, peace and security, it's future of work, and then us focusing on energy, on climate policy and industrial policy, which of course is also quite an important part of our work. This is like mostly clean tech. Industrial policy, of course. And this is within Europe, but also concerning Europe's position in the world and also Europe's relations to other countries in the world. So I'm going to share my presentation here as well. Yeah, when we started working here in the Competence Center, we quite soon commissioned this survey because we wanted to find out how can the social ecological transformation be successful? So under which circumstances is it going to be accepted by the population? Which groups in society can be won over, and under what conditions, of course, this is quite an important question as well. And then also which measures are promising, which are rather no-goes. We really looked a lot in different measures here, as Asbjørn already mentioned. 19 countries. You can see here most of them within the European Union, but also some others. And this was carried out by the Sinus Institute based in Germany. And Asbjørn already mentioned this, of course, since we started working on the project, those questions even gained in importance. We were asking here because we see more challenges arising now. We have even quite a severe talk of a backlash when it comes to the climate agenda and also the acceptance or the interest in climate policy. And what we have seen, we came out here with 5 key messages out of our survey. I'm going to talk about this briefly later. And we are under the impression that we have already seen in this survey many aspects we see right now in the current situation and under more really severe circumstances, you might say. So our 5 key messages here based on the results of this survey. For us, it seems that they are really a pretty good way in staying put with the climate agenda, but also at the same time addressing the concerns and needs of the population here. Which areas did we investigate concretely? Problem awareness of climate issues. Asbjørn already showed some results here. Do people consider this as a really important question, but also which other political topics are of concern to them, and also a bit what's the relation then here. Then, of course, interest in and levels of knowledge about climate and climate policies. I think that's also quite important. Do people, for example, really feel well informed, or which parts of society feel better informed than others, etc. Attitudes, motivators, and barriers for climate and environmentally conscious behaviors. So this is also a bit about what I said before, the what to do, what not to do, and where to enter the discussion here also with the society. And then those attitudes toward changing our way of life and the economy, and here really looking into very concrete measures, a bunch of them. As I said, we were working with the Sinus Institute on this. What Sinus does, they are approaching those questions from a milieu level here. So they're not only looking at majorities, but also looking in like different milieus here based on the social status. This, of course, has to do a lot like with the income, but also education level, but also basic values, especially when it comes to transition. And they do this in order to find out who is like more reluctant, which groups of society, and also why. And their strong recommendation here, based also on the findings of this survey in the 19 countries, is really to focus more on this group here in the slight greenish color, those in the center here as well, lower center, because they say they are right now more insecure, critical. We call this, like in our project, a bit the yes, please, but kind of situation. Those people are quite concerned of climate change, but at the same time, they share right now the self-image of not being seen in their own hardships and worries on a more daily basis here. And their perception in a nutshell is a bit, those with money can afford the costs of this ecological transformation and even doing so without changing their behavior. And they themselves here, this lower center milieus, they are in a strong fear of decline. Right now, they are generally open. This was the core message here as well. They can be won over for a climate policy, but under certain circumstances, of course, and that they are also like quite influential, yeah, in order to make sure to win support in the society. If you really can gain their support, it's going to have an impact for the rest of the society, but also, of course, this works in the other direction as well. And Asbjørn already stated, of course, we are now especially in Germany, for example, but also in other countries, we looked at here in the survey under like stronger economic problems, etc. So this might even be stronger right now. Yeah, this concern not being seen in Europe, like economic hardship, for example. And therefore, of course, it's more difficult to win those groups over than those you see in the here higher social status groups, for example, who are already quite convinced and also maybe more willing to carry out some climate policies. But of course, for me, this is really like the litmus test here, you might say. Yeah, it is more difficult to win those people over. They have more to lose, be it in the job, be it also in their financial situation, be it when it comes to housing, etc., which is a great concern throughout Europe. But of course, if climate policy only works for those who are better off, then of course it's doomed to fail from the outset, and especially in such a challenging economic situation as some countries are finding themselves in right now. So for us, it's pretty clear that we have to bring this together, even like this public services of general interest, with an improvement here in order to really make sure that we can win the support. When it now comes to the three countries we were looking at here, there were, Christina talked about this at the beginning of the preconceptions, and of course we had those as well, and it was quite interesting. Also, in our three countries here, there were the highest numbers in no, there is no fundamental change needed in our way of life and work, still on a lower level, of course. The average throughout those 19 countries was 12%, but in Germany it was 18, in Denmark 21, and in Sweden 24. This came as a surprise to us. First of all, in Germany, for example, we always consider ourselves, or considered in the past ourselves, as like kind of a front runner here in energy and climate policy. I have to say we are really not looking at the very different results here and many questions. We are among the most skeptical, were back then, and I think this is even stronger now. And also when it comes from an outside perspective here, also the values for Denmark and Sweden were maybe a bit more surprising for us, because we initially assumed, I think this is a bit the image the Nordics have in the rest of Europe, that the commitment would be highest here. But of course, there might be like different reasons, and you also, there can also be found some assumptions in the report here carried out by Asbjørn, for example, that there are other pressing topics. Yeah, so we see here, for example, in this presentation, the European South attributes much higher importance to climate change, but of course they suffer maybe the consequences more severely. And also this was a thought we had, that in our countries we are quite advanced in the rollout of renewables already, also like in the heat transition. At least this is true for Denmark and Sweden, so this might of course also be a reason here. And this question was really a key question for us here. Yeah, Asbjørn talked about this shortly before, and I think this is really quite important. Measures to protect the climate and the environment are socially unjust, as they burden low-income earners in particular. So I think this is, of course, as I said before, if people are under this assumption, there's no question that we are really facing quite a hard time when it comes to the acceptance of climate policy. And Asbjørn talked already about the interlinkage here of personal responsibility and the support for costly climate policies, and in connection with lower education levels or lower income. What we've seen really quite strongly here in the survey, that we have quite a heavy elitist perception in a way. And then, of course, people are also feeling, I think this is also an important explanation why they might show here less personal responsibility. First of all, of course, people with lower education are more often employed in sectors affected by climate regulation. And I think this is even going in Germany, for example. This is even being more acute right now when it comes to the job perspectives. But what we have also seen is that those of a lower income see pretty well that they are not driving climate change as strongly as those with a higher income, for example, because of the lifestyle, also because of one kind of thought. So when we come to our 5 key messages, the first, and I think this is really like for us, the most important one, shape change in a socially just way. It always seems as such a no-brainer. Yeah, of course we have to do this. And the rhetoric is already there. But we see, of course, that we are not really there in practice in many countries, and that so far the people who are better off financially also are favored by subsidies, for example. You need a car, you need to have enough money to buy an electric car in order to get the subsidy for it, or you need to have a house on your own in order to get the subsidies for the solar panels, for example. So we really need a more differentiated approach here needed in those funding programs. Asbjørn already showed some the figures here for this as well. And it's not only out of a question of social justice, it's really because people know this, that they are not as much responsible here for driving climate change. And then, of course, this is also like a question of acceptance. To say, okay, those who are more responsible here, they should pay more, for example, in order to finance the transition, and they also should be held more accountable here. And Asbjørn already mentioned, for example, this flyer tax, which seems important to us, for example, then is not to have like one size fits all approach, but to say the frequent flyer tax might be here a really well-balanced measure, for example. And also quite important for us to have specific focus on providing alternatives for those who might be here more in need of this. For example, people in the rural areas, they do not have as much possibilities to use public transport. So of course, then, for example, looking maybe into a differentiated approach here when it comes to subsidy schemes, yeah, to give those people more because they really have not the alternative to go to a public transport. So this is quite, for us, this was quite important. Then the other ones I only want to mention, like shorter here, promote the common good and personal quality of life. This is also quite important. People should have a benefit. This might not be possible in every policy area, but as much as possible, of course. Then quite important for us, the ambitious industrial and really active labor market policy, more important now than ever, I think, in this time of transition and fear. Actively involve citizens, be it having them benefit from, for example, local wind parks, etc., but also when it comes to make decisions. And this is true, of course, also for the workforce, to involve the workers there, and to have a clearer communication around climate and climate policy and avoid some of the mistakes we made here in the past. Who is interested in this should then take a look, please, on our homepage. You can see also like other reports from other countries there, or the comparative report, and you find this on our FES Just Climate webpage. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Claudia. We are been given a lot of information here, and I would warmly recommend everyone to go to this site because it has a richness of reports, but also I think, Claudia, you managed very well to summarize your findings, and there are lots of fact sheets and presentations for those of you who do not have much time. Go to that site and you will get a very nice overview. We have been joined now by Jytte Guteland, who is member of the Swedish Parliament, also a long-term member of the European Parliament. Jytte, you have read the reports that we have been discussing this morning. We also had the privilege to meet you yesterday in Parliament to discuss in particular the report that Asbjørn has co-authored. Please, Jytte, the floor is yours for some comments.
Thank you.
What are the takeaways from these reports?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Asbjørn and Claudia, both for the work on the report and the presentation now, and also the comments. Thank you also to the organizers for having me. I think it's extremely valuable for us who work in the parties around in Europe, but also in the Parliament as legislators, to take notice of this report and learn from it. I had the privilege to have some presentations also yesterday, and I read about the figures, how it looks in the different countries. I was, of course, extra eager to read about how Swedes are reasoning, and I learned that it is very high concern among Swedes when it comes to being afraid of the climate change and feel that it is extremely important. I saw a figure, I think 79% of the Swedes are afraid of the consequences of the climate change. And also, even though I also heard now in the presentations that there are different opinions among the low-income households and the high-income owners when it comes to how much you're willing to pay and to compensate low-income households for costly climate change tools. I do also think that when I see a figure like 82% of the Swedes are willing to compensate, then I find that a very high figure, and it gives a good ground for also compensate low-income households for costly climate change tools. So for me, this study gives hope for a ground for climate policy that's needed now. And since we are 1.5 years in front of the Swedish election, I think we in Sweden should learn from this and analyze how we can build our policy framework and our also strategies in front of the election based on this. I think also when I look at the daily work here in the Swedish Parliament, Sveriges riksdag, that I believe that we also need to see that when we have the debates, when we are part also of opinion building activities as politicians, we need to see that we are also creating the opinion. We are not only following it, but we are actually part of creating the opinion. I think not at least now when you look at what's happening in in the United States, and when you look over the seas and see how Trump is behaving, one conclusion is, of course, we need to take a big responsible for climate policy creating and also leading the climate change and the transition in the European Union. That is one conclusion. The other learning I find is that when you see a politician like Trump, then you understand that a person and a few persons can be extremely important formulating opinion and mobilizing. And therefore, it is if you look at what he has done in the Republicans when it comes to opinions on the NATO, on security policy, the views on what the United States should be, then you must see that he changed completely the opinions by being very strong in his opinions. So even though with this study, who is giving extremely hopeful insights, thank you for that, I also think we have a responsibility as politicians to be active and be vocal about the need for an ambitious climate policy mix in legislation, in the budget, in all the tools that we can use. And that being said, I also think that was also came up in the dialogue on this study is that we need people to change. We need behavior change in income groups, but also being individuals in our societies. We need to think, all of us, how we live our lives and how we consume and all of that. But to make this transition happen, the big thing is actually what's happening in the politics. We need legislation, we need budget, we need all of those tools. And to create that, we need people to vote for that. And there, as the final word, then I want to speak longer, but I see Lisa now, so I really think that we have a responsibility to learn from this study, be more vocal, create hope, show that in politics this transition can happen, and it is not only possible but necessary for the planet, but it will also create good news for society, better opportunities for jobs, and for our companies, make them more innovative. And we can see that in other studies, that the transition actually creates more jobs, not less jobs in Europe, better air quality, better opportunities for people to live healthy. And it is finally also a great opportunity for us who believe in a more equal society to have a combination between the reduction of emissions and a more fair policy agenda for the welfare and for more fair economic policies. So that is actually good news. And I think I would like to also conclude with some good news. I think this can give the social democracy a push in front of the election movement to give some hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jytte, and thank you particularly for ending on a positive note. I'd like to ask Asbjørn and Claudia to switch on and join our meeting again just briefly. Maybe you would like Claudia, Asbjørn, to comment upon this. I suppose always as researcher, when you do a report, you do hope that it can influence policy somehow, maybe even influence the outcome of elections. What would be your message based on what you have done? What can be valuable when preparing elections? And now, Claudia, maybe a comment. Is climate an issue at all in this very hastily organized German elections? Claudia? Yes,
there's a lot of critics going on that climate is not an important topic, but I have to say I'm always not so totally convinced that this is even true. Like climate per se, I'd say this might be. We also see this in the figures, of course, that people attribute like less importance right now to the climate issue itself. But on the other hand, we see, of course, a strong importance of energy policy. We see a strong importance of industrial policy. And this, of course, is totally, there's a strong interlinkage here, yeah, to the climate agenda. So I think if we get those areas right, the energy policy and the industrial policy, and especially look here at also both what Jytte also mentioned here, social justice and the opportunities for the future, then I would say it's certainly not true to say the climate policy is not on the agenda. We really have to think about it like in a combined way.
Thank you, Claudia. Asbjørn, you have
just actually we did just to comment. I really liked your comments, Jytte, it also demonstrates that there always is a sort of a leap or a between is and ought, because what we have found is how things look, but what is the sort of the political steps that you have to take on that background. And I totally like the idea and your input that we also have to be opinion leaders, that we cannot just react passively and sort of just being taking cues from voters, but we also have to influence voters. I will, however, say that in terms of changing people's opinions and assuming leadership, evidence seems to show that when people's experiences are very personal and it's like cost of living, jobs, and so on, they sort of win over whatever goes on in the sort of communication world. So when we have strong experiences with unemployment or cost of living, we are very hard to persuade that these are not problems. So my point is that we have to take real people's real problems seriously. And I think we all agree on that. And that, of course, is both the opportunity and the challenge that we have to face on the center left, because we have to make it a fair transition. And I will refer to one other study that we made because the results were so clear. Although it's some years ago, we were sort of posing a dilemma between investing in welfare, healthcare, education, and so on, and the climate. So we were simply asking, so should we prioritize investing in welfare even at the cost of the climate ambitions, and vice versa? Should we invest in the climate even at the cost of not investing so much in welfare? So we were posing like two tough situations. We were placing people between a rock and a hard place, right? So what we found is, and I think you all know this, is that there is an educational and age divide. So young and highly educated people would prioritize climate over sort of, what should we say, bread and butter welfare issues, and less so among elderly people and less so among people of less education. And I think Claudia has touched upon it. Why is this so? They are maybe more affected. They are more affected in terms of jobs and income and so on. But I would just say, and that should be my comment to all this, we have to find a balance where we are not going to make it a tough choice for our constituencies, which are not the highest income and which are not, in all cases, the most educated voters. So we cannot turn the climate ambition into a choice of climate or welfare, or climate or investing in jobs. And I think we're all aware of that, and you have all commented on it. But that is the challenge to us. But if that implies a small extra personal cost to combat the climate, people are actually willing to take on a small cost to do some ambitious climate policies, but we cannot make it we cannot turn it into a tough choice between jobs and income and climate. Then I'm sure that we will lose. So on that note, thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Asbjørn. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Jytte. I think these messages were extremely valuable to us. Take real people's real problems seriously. Make it easy to be part of the transition. Yesterday at Parliament, we talked about an equality mainstreaming of all climate policies to take the opportunity to make our societies a little bit less unequal by every climate policy, so that we can deliver on this promise as progressives to make society a little less unequal, also when dealing with climate policies. It should definitely not be the other way around. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. There's a lot of reading to be done. As I said before, go to our homepage or the homepage of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and you will access all these reports. I will ask Asbjørn for a link to the report you mentioned just now, and we post it on our Facebook site so that you can all read and share the insights. I'm looking forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you so much for today.